It started like any other night on a quiet Alabama highway until it became a moment that would shake the system. A decorated black Navy veteran driving home after an evening of public service gets pulled over. But what happens next isn't just a traffic stop. It's an abuse of power, a test of dignity, and the beginning of a reckoning. He thought she was just another woman he could intimidate. He had no idea who she was, and even less idea what was coming. This isn't just a story. It's a message for everyone who's ever been underestimated, disrespected, or silenced. So grab your coffee, settle in, and watch what happens when quiet strength meets injustice head on. If this story moves you, please like the video, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to tap the bell so you never miss stories that speak truth to power. The highway just outside Montgomery, Alabama, stretched long and quiet beneath a moonless sky. It was nearly midnight, and the only sound was the soft hum of tires on asphalt as Angela Merritt guided her silver sedan down the two-lane road. The rain had just passed, leaving the pavement slick and shining under intermittent streetlights. Angela, 55, was heading home from a veterans panel she'd been invited to speak at, an event she had almost declined after a long week. Dressed in a plain black sweater and jeans, with her salt and pepper hair pulled back neatly, she didn't look like a decorated Navy veteran or someone who had commanded respect in war zones. She looked to anyone passing by like just another black woman driving alone at night. Then came the lights, red and blue, flashing fast behind her. She sighed and slowed down, easing onto the shoulder of the road. Her training kicked in instantly. Hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. Engine off, window cracked, no sudden movements. She had lived through combat deployments, survived IED blasts, and negotiated with foreign commanders. But this, the stillness before a police officer approached, this was its own kind of danger. In her rearview mirror, she watched the patrol car door swing open. The man approaching was thick-set, mid-40s, with the kind of walk that made a statement. His flashlight beam danced across her rear window as he approached. His name badge glinted in the light. Sergeant Kyle Brenner. She'd heard of him. Small-town patrolman with a bigger reputation than his jurisdiction deserved. And a pattern, one that didn't go unnoticed in communities like hers. He tapped on her window with the flashlight. "License and registration," he barked, not even glancing at her face. Angela remained calm. "Yes, sir. May I reach into the glove box to retrieve it?" "Just give me the documents," he snapped. She moved slowly, deliberately, retrieving her license from her wallet and the registration from the glove box, then handed them over. "Was I speeding, officer?" Brenner didn't answer at first. He inspected the documents with a scowl, then said, "Tail lights out." Angela frowned. "I had it serviced last week. It shouldn't be." "You arguing with me?" His voice sharpened, suddenly on edge. "No, sir," she replied. "Just stating." "Step out of the vehicle." Her grip tightened on the steering wheel for a fraction of a second. "I'd appreciate it if you could clarify the reason, Sergeant." "Am I being detained?" "Now you're being difficult," he muttered. The tension in the air grew thick, crackling like static before a lightning strike. Angela exhaled slowly, then unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door. The cool night air brushed her skin as she stood upright, calm and dignified, despite the sharp stare Brenner leveled at her. "Hands on the vehicle." She turned, placing her palms on the damp roof of her car. "You got an attitude problem," he said as he came around behind her. "Think that badge on your license means something? What are you, military?" "Yes, sir. Retired Navy. Lieutenant Commander." That gave him pause, but only briefly. "Yeah, well, that don't mean squat out here," he muttered. Then louder, "You're under arrest." "For what?" "Obstructing an officer. Resisting questioning." She turned her head slightly. "I haven't resisted anything." Brenner didn't respond. Instead, he pulled her arms behind her, far rougher than necessary, and clamped cold metal cuffs on her wrists. Angela didn't flinch. She didn't cry out, but her breath caught in her chest. Not from fear. She had faced far greater threats in her life. It was the sheer indignity, the abuse of power, and the knowledge that, in this moment, none of her service, none of her medals, none of her years of honor mattered. He shoved her toward the squad car. "You can tell your story to the judge." The hard plastic back seat offered no comfort. As the door slammed shut behind her, Angela sat upright, back straight, wrists burning. The reflection in the partition glass showed her face, calm, unreadable. But inside, something deeper churned. Not rage, not fear, resolve. Because what Sergeant Kyle Brenner didn't know, what he couldn't have guessed in 1,000 years, was that Angela Merritt was not just some woman driving home late at night. She had friends in high places, former commanding officers who still took her calls, attorneys who owed her favors, public officials who trusted her judgment. And more than that, she knew the system, knew how to fight back. And this time, she would. As the patrol car pulled back onto the highway, Angela turned her eyes toward the road ahead. Not the one that led to the station, but the one that led to justice. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every black woman who had ever been silenced, every veteran who had come home only to be disrespected in their own country. Every time someone in power decided their badge gave them the right to strip another person's dignity away. Sergeant Brenner had picked the wrong one, and he was about to find out just how wrong. Angela Merritt sat in the back of the patrol car, her wrists aching from the too tight handcuffs. The cold plastic seat pressed against her back as Sergeant Kyle Brenner drove through the quiet streets of Montgomery, Alabama. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the wet pavement, casting eerie shadows that danced across the buildings they passed. Brenner glanced at her through the rearview mirror, a smug grin on his face. "You know, most folks don't give me lip when I tell them to step out of the car," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Angela didn't respond. She kept her gaze steady, her posture straight. Years of military training had taught her the importance of composure, even in the face of injustice. At the station, Brenner yanked the door open and roughly pulled her out. "Let's go," he barked, leading her inside. The fluorescent lights inside the station buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare on the worn linoleum floors. Angela was led to the booking area, where a bored-looking officer sat behind a desk. "Name?" the officer asked without looking up. "Angela Merritt," she replied, her voice calm. "Charges?" the officer asked Brenner. "Obstruction and resisting arrest," Brenner said, a satisfied smirk on his face. Angela raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She knew better than to argue in this setting. After being fingerprinted and having her mugshot taken, Angela was led to a holding cell. The metal door clanged shut behind her, the sound echoing in the small, stark room. She sat on the hard bench, her hands resting in her lap. Time passed slowly. Angela focused on her breathing, drawing on her training to maintain her composure. She thought about her years of service, the sacrifices she'd made, and the principles she'd upheld. This situation was a test of those very principles. Eventually, Brenner appeared at the cell door. "You know, if you just kept your mouth shut, none of this would have happened," he sneered. Angela met his gaze. "If you'd done your job properly, none of this would have happened," she replied evenly. Brenner's face flushed with anger, but he said nothing. He turned and walked away, leaving Angela alone once more. In the silence, Angela reflected on the events that had led her here. She knew that this was not just about her. It was about a system that allowed officers like Brenner to abuse their power without consequence. But she also knew that she had the strength and the resolve to stand up against it. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and prepared herself for the fight ahead. The early morning hours dragged on in that dimly lit holding cell, But Angela Merritt sat with the calm of someone who had been through far worse. The steel bench beneath her was cold, her wrists still sore from the unnecessarily tight cuffs Sergeant Kyle Brenner had slapped on her earlier that night. But she didn't fidget. She didn't break. Years of military discipline had taught her how to wait, how to watch. Meanwhile, across the small Alabama precinct, the tone was shifting, subtly but unmistakably. Out front, a young officer named Dean Rowley tapped nervously on the department's front desk with the back of his pen. Just 25, fresh out of academy training and not even 2 months into full duty, he had been watching the night unfold with a growing sense of discomfort. Something about it all felt wrong. Sergeant Brenner had strutted in earlier like he had just bagged a drug kingpin, laughing, boasting, mocking, talking about how some folks don't know when to keep their mouths shut. But it didn't sit right with Dean, not when he saw the woman in the cell. Her posture, her clarity, the quiet command in the way she carried herself. She didn't belong in that cell. That hunch turned into certainty the moment Dean stepped into the records office and saw a blinking red light on line 2. The call had been transferred over from dispatch, marked urgent. "This is Captain Douglas Vance," the voice on the other end had said, slow and even, but carrying an unmistakable authority. "I'm looking for a Sergeant Brenner. I need to know if he brought in a woman named Angela Merritt tonight." Dean hesitated. "Who's asking again?" "I'm her former commanding officer in the United States Navy," Vance replied, his tone tightening. "And if you're recording this call, I'd advise you to forward it to your chief immediately, because if what I've heard is true, you've got a serious problem on your hands." Now standing behind the front desk, Dean was trying to find the words and the courage to let Brenner know that things were unraveling. Fast. He took a deep breath, then knocked on the small glass window of the back office. The door opened with a lazy creak, and there was Brenner, sitting with his boots up on the desk, sipping from a paper cup and smirking like the king of the county. "What is it, Rowley?" he asked, not even turning around fully. Dean cleared his throat. Sir, you might want to take a look at this." He handed over the printed transcript of the call, along with a post-it note with a callback number. Brenner took it with a scoff until he saw the name. His smirk faltered. "Captain Vance?" Dean nodded slowly. "Yeah. He said he served with Miss Merritt, said he's already spoken with legal counsel and someone at the Department of Defense." That was the first time Dean had seen actual worry on Brenner's face. Brenner stood fast. "You tell anyone else about this?" "No, sir, not yet, but there's more." Dean pointed toward the intake logs. "There's already a request from a civil rights lawyer, Sharon Ellison, from Montgomery. She's on her way here. Said she has documentation about who Angela Merritt is, and that she's demanding immediate access." For a brief moment, Brenner looked cornered. His eyes darted around the office like he was trying to find an exit. Then he barked, "Keep quiet about this. Do not mention this to anyone else, not even the desk sergeant." Dean hesitated. "Sir, respectfully, if she really is who they say she is—" "I said shut it," Brenner snapped, his voice sharp, unhinged. "You let me handle this." Dean stepped back. "Yes, sir." Brenner stormed toward the hallway that led to the holding cells, fury in his gait now, not pride. Angela heard him coming before she saw him. The rhythm of his boots had changed. No longer casual, no longer smug. He was rattled. He appeared at her cell door like a man who had just learned the house was on fire, but was still pretending the smoke was no big deal. "What the hell did you do?" he demanded. Angela didn't move from her seat. She just looked up at him, cool and composed. "I didn't do anything," she said quietly. "But you did." Brenner's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Don't get smart with me." She raised an eyebrow. "You put cuffs on a Navy veteran with no probable cause, shoved her into a cell, and laughed about it. And now you're surprised someone's asking questions? He stepped forward. Who the hell did you call? Angela leaned back. You ever hear of Captain Douglas Vance? His face twitched. I served under him for 7 years, she continued. He made one call. That's all it takes. Brenner's jaw worked, but no words came. Somewhere down the hallway, a phone rang again. He flinched. Angela stood, slow and graceful. Sergeant, you're not the only one who knows how to operate within a chain of command. The difference is, I still respect mine. As she stared him down, it was clear. The shift had begun. Power, once held in clenched fists and cruel smirks, was slipping away. And for the first time that night, it was Kyle Brenner who had something to fear. The next morning, the courthouse steps were unusually quiet, but inside the tension brewed like a southern summer storm. People filed into the courtroom, expecting a routine hearing, maybe a postponement, maybe a quiet dismissal. What they got instead was a reckoning in real time. Angela Merritt sat at the plaintiff's table, not in an orange jumpsuit, not behind bars, but in a sharp navy blue blazer, the kind of cut that spoke of strength, discipline, and dignity. Her posture was upright, calm, composed, a quiet storm in waiting. Beside her sat Sharon Ellison, her civil rights attorney. Sharon was reviewing documents with the same clinical sharpness she was known for in Montgomery. Efficient, fearless, and absolutely lethal in the courtroom. Her reading glasses rested low on her nose, but her eyes were blazing. At the defense table sat Sergeant Kyle Brenner, now stripped of his arrogance. The smug grin he had worn the night before had vanished. In its place sat a twitch of discomfort, the faint furrow of someone who finally realized he may have pushed one step too far. He still wore his uniform, but there was a tension in his shoulders. He was no longer confident that the badge would protect him. Judge Richard Lyle entered the courtroom quietly, his robe swaying slightly as he settled into his seat. He adjusted his glasses and gave a tired look across the room. 65 and weary of empty promises, Judge Lyle had seen his share of abuses, but what he read in the morning's brief had unsettled even him. Let's get to it, he said, voice firm but quiet. The courtroom quieted. The clerk called the case number and read the names aloud, followed by a hushed murmur when the words Plaintiff Angela Merritt echoed through the room. People leaned in. Reporters at the back of the gallery sat up straighter. Something was different today, and everyone knew it. Counselor, Judge Lyle said, addressing Sharon. Proceed. Sharon rose smoothly. Your Honor, we are here today to seek immediate dismissal of all charges levied against my client, Lieutenant Commander Angela Merritt, retired Navy, decorated for honorable service, and unlawfully detained 2 nights ago during a routine traffic stop by Sergeant Kyle Brenner. She handed over a file, thick with evidence. This file includes body cam footage from the night in question. What it shows is a clear abuse of authority, lack of probable cause, and flagrant disregard for both protocol and human dignity. We also have character affidavits, military service records, and internal data pointing to a disturbing pattern in Sergeant Brenner's stops over the past 5 years. The judge leaned forward. You have the footage? Sharon nodded. We do. The screen was lowered, and with a click, the footage began to play. The room fell into a tense silence as Brenner's voice filled the space. Harsh, condescending, unmistakably aggressive. There was no raised voice from Angela, no resistance. Just calm questions, measured responses, and then force. The handcuffs, the shove into the patrol car, the smirk, the laughter, the humiliation. When the video ended, the silence in the courtroom wasn't just heavy, it was devastating. Judge Lyle removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Sergeant Brenner, he said, voice quiet, do you have anything you'd like to say before I proceed? Brenner stood slowly. Your Honor, I was following protocol. I believe the situation called for caution. Lyle looked at him squarely. Caution? You handcuffed a 55-year-old Navy veteran with no prior record, whose license and registration were valid, whose taillights were working, and whose only offense was asserting her rights calmly. That's your version of protocol? Brenner's jaw tightened. She was non-compliant. Sharon rose again. Your Honor, if asking a question is now considered non-compliance, then we've abandoned every principle of justice we claim to uphold. Judge Lyle nodded slowly. You're right, Ms. Ellison. He turned to the room, his voice steady but firm. I've spent nearly 4 decades on this bench. I've seen law twisted into a shield for the guilty and a weapon against the innocent. But I have rarely seen a case where power was so blatantly misused. He turned back to Sharon. All charges against Lieutenant Commander Merritt are hereby dismissed with prejudice. The gavel struck like thunder. I am also referring this case to the Office of Internal Affairs and recommending an immediate review of Sergeant Brenner's conduct, including a full audit of his stops over the last 10 years. Further, I will be requesting a federal inquiry into patterns of racial bias in this department. The courtroom erupted, not with cheers, but with an almost reverent silence. It was the kind of silence that comes when justice finally speaks in a room that has waited too long to hear it. Angela remained composed. She didn't gloat. She didn't glare at Brenner. She simply gathered her papers with quiet precision. But as she rose, she turned just enough to catch his eye. You picked the wrong woman, her gaze seemed to say. And in that moment, Sergeant Kyle Brenner understood. He hadn't just pulled over another black woman that night. He had pulled over the very system he thought he could bend, and it was bending back. The atmosphere inside the Birmingham Police Department's Internal Affairs Division had shifted from quiet discomfort to palpable tension. Word had spread like wildfire, and the storm centered on Sergeant Kyle Brenner. Hours after Judge Richard Lyle dismissed all charges against Angela Merritt in open court, the repercussions started rolling in, fast and loud. Local media had picked up the story. Body cam footage of the unlawful arrest was now public record, and community leaders, veterans groups, and civil rights advocates were demanding answers. Chief Harold Stokes stood in his office, arms crossed tightly over his chest, staring down the hallway toward the meeting room where Brenner sat, waiting. The chief had served for over 30 years. He had seen crises come and go. But this wasn't just about one rogue officer. This was about trust, and it was unraveling by the hour. He finally stepped into the room, flanked by 2 internal affairs officers and a legal advisor. Brenner looked up from his chair, his once smug expression carefully masked behind forced calm. But even he couldn't hide the flicker of dread in his eyes. Sergeant Brenner, Chief Stokes began, voice low and unflinching, we're placing you on immediate administrative suspension pending a full investigation into your conduct during the traffic stop and arrest of Lieutenant Commander Angela Merritt. Brenner opened his mouth to protest, but the chief held up a hand. Don't, Stokes warned, his tone like gravel. This isn't the time for spin. A stack of documents was placed on the table, case files, review forms, and formal complaints. The internal affairs investigator began flipping through them. We've received multiple inquiries from the Department of Justice, the investigator said. They're launching a review of every arrest you've conducted over the last 7 years. We've already found troubling patterns, specifically your disproportionate number of stops involving black drivers, many of which escalated with no documented justification. Brenner shifted in his seat. This is political. No, Chief Stokes cut in. This is personal. You treated a decorated Navy veteran like a criminal. You mocked her, cuffed her, and processed her like she was less than human, all while knowing you had no cause. And you did it with a smile on your face. The words landed heavy. For the first time in his career, Brenner realized the walls were closing in. He had spent years getting away with veiled racism, masked under procedural jargon and thin excuses. He counted on silence, on people looking the other way. But now every file with his name on it had a red flag. Every questionable stop was being re-examined, and the public was watching. "You've embarrassed this department," the chief continued, "and you've put every decent officer under a microscope because you couldn't keep your power in check." Brenner looked down, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "Turn in your badge and weapon," the internal affairs officer said. "You're suspended without pay, effective immediately." There was no ceremony, no defense, just the scrape of a badge sliding across the table and a pair of eyes that no longer looked entitled, but afraid. Back at her home across town, Angela Merritt sat on her porch, a cup of hot tea in her hands. Her phone buzzed again. It was Sharon Ellison, her attorney. "He's suspended," Sharon said flatly. "Internal affairs is moving fast. DOJ is watching." Angela didn't say much. She didn't need to. The news didn't surprise her. It didn't excite her either. She just nodded and looked toward the street, where children were playing under golden afternoon sunlight. One man's reckoning had begun. But for Angela Merritt, this was never about vengeance. It was about accountability. And now finally it had a name. Kyle Brenner. Suspended, exposed, and no longer untouchable. The morning after Sergeant Kyle Brenner's suspension, Angela Merritt stood in the kitchen of her modest home in Montgomery, Alabama, quietly brewing a fresh pot of coffee. Outside, the neighborhood stirred to life. The distant rumble of garbage trucks, the steady patter of shoes against pavement as joggers passed by, the occasional bark of a dog from 2 houses down. Life was moving forward, as it always did. Angela didn't celebrate. There was no need for fanfare, no loud victory speech or parade. That had never been her way. She simply poured her coffee into a ceramic mug, one she'd carried through every duty station from San Diego to Norfolk, and sat on the porch beneath the morning sun. Her phone buzzed gently on the side table beside her. She ignored it at first, choosing instead to focus on the steam curling above the rim of her mug, the rhythm of her breath, the slow return of peace to a soul that had spent too many years navigating silence and injustice. Then the phone buzzed again. She reached for it finally and glanced at the screen. A call from Washington, D.C. She answered with her usual calm. "Lieutenant Commander Merritt," a polished voice asked. "This is Captain Douglas Vance with the Department of Defense. I hope I'm not disturbing your morning." Angela's lips curved into a soft, rare smile. "Captain Vance, it's been a long time." "It has," he said warmly. "I just wanted to say, what you did this week, it mattered. People saw it. People heard it. Not just in the courtroom, but across the country. The department's been briefed. There's talk of inviting you to speak on dignity and leadership under pressure. No pressure, of course, just consideration." Angela nodded slowly, letting the words settle. "I'll think about it," she said, "but I didn't do it to make headlines." "I know that," he replied. "That's what makes it powerful." After she hung up, another message came through, this time from the mayor's office. A formal invitation to attend a recognition ceremony next month, commending her for grace and professionalism in the face of blatant injustice. She read it twice, then tucked the phone away without replying. Not out of disrespect, but out of reflection. Her fight had never been about applause. It had been about truth, about standing firm when it would have been easier and safer to shrink. She hadn't just done it for herself. She had done it for every young black man pulled over for fitting a description, for every black woman told to sit down, shut up, and stay quiet. She thought about the other names on the internal affairs report, people who'd filed complaints that were buried, people who had no rank, no title, no uniform to protect them, People who had walked the same halls as she had and left feeling smaller, erased. Angela didn't see herself as a hero, just a woman with a backbone and a voice she refused to silence. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, she rose from her chair and walked back inside. The house was still, quiet, and full of light. On her kitchen counter lay a folded copy of the morning paper. The headline read, "Veteran Navy Officer Stands Tall Against Injustice. A System Starts to Shift." Angela didn't read the article. She already knew the story. She had lived it. And now she would carry it forward. Not loudly, not bitterly, but with every calm, deliberate step she took from here on. Not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong, only to prove they always did. Angela Merritt's story is more than just a tale of injustice. It's a lesson in quiet courage, dignity, and the power of standing firm even when the world tries to reduce you. At 55, after decades of serving her country with honor, she was still forced to prove her worth on the side of a dark road. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because someone saw only her skin color, not her character. Yet through it all, Angela never raised her voice. She didn't shout, fight, or retaliate. She stayed composed. She let truth be her defense and integrity be her weapon. This is a reminder that strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it's the calm voice in the storm. Sometimes it's knowing who you are when others try to strip you of your identity. For our older generation, those who've seen marches, changes, victories, and setbacks, this story echoes a familiar truth. We've come far, but we are not done. Angela's restraint teaches us that fighting back doesn't always mean yelling or swinging. Sometimes it means refusing to let someone rob you of your peace. It means standing your ground, even when your knees are tired. It means trusting that character, real, time-tested character, still matters. Let this story be a call to remember your own worth, to speak up even quietly when something isn't right, and to support those who do the same. Whether you're a veteran, a mother, a retired worker, or someone who's been dismissed one too many times, remember this. Your voice still matters. You've earned the right to be heard. If Angela's story touched you, if it reminded you of a time you had to stand tall when the world tried to shrink you, please like this video, leave a comment below to share your thoughts or experiences, and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss another story that honors truth, courage, and the strength of everyday Americans. Because your voice still matters, and here it will always be heard.